Week 5 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week number 1 Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, so it don't matter if it's Hill or Justin Jefferson. These guys are interchangeable at 1 or 2 this season. So right now, a good matchup versus Giants, one of the worst secondaries and youngest secondaries in the league, with 2 rookies starting. And after getting blown out last week was this Miami Dolphin team. I think Tyreek Hill erupts and has a monster game. He's won number 2 Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So Justin Jefferson, he's living up to that number 1 pick overall so far this season. And this weekend, a potential high-scoring shootout versus Kansas City Chiefs. It wouldn't be surprising to me if Jefferson has one of those monster 30, 35-point fantasy days in a shootout like I mentioned. And I have him at 2. Number 3, Stefon Diggs. Buffalo Bills. So the Bills versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, where their secondary is a little leaky back there, where I think Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen, they're on the same page once again this season. He had 3 touchdowns in last week's ball game. I'm not saying he's going to go out there and do that once again, but I think Stefon Diggs, he's on a pace this season to have a monster year and one of the best seasons of his career, even though he's put up Pro Bowl stats pretty much each and every year since he's been a Buffalo Bill. And this week here versus Jacksonville, he has another great game, so I got him at 3. Number 4, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. So A.J. Brown last week erupted with over 35 fantasy points in PPR leagues, and him and Jalen Hurts back on the same page after they had an argument on the sidelines a few weeks ago. And this week, a pretty good matchup versus suspect secondary at the Los Angeles Rams. So this Ram team last week blew a 23-0 lead, and we know this Eagle team, they like to play a lot of backyard football, just throw it up, make explosive plays. And this week here, I think we see more of the same from A.J. Brown, and it's always a plus to play indoors. Number 5, Davante Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Davante Adams versus his former team, you know he's hungry to go out there and have a big ball game. And Adams last week was shaken up with a wrist shoulder injury, but he came back into the game and finished up and played pretty decent for this Raider team. So we don't know if it's going to be Jimmy Garoppolo or Aiden O'Donnell starting in this one, but with a wide receiver like Davante Adams, who's talented and could pretty much make any plays with any quarterbacks, I got him at 5 versus former team. This week, number 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. So St. Brown, he might not play in this ball game. Coach Dan Campbell said he's iffy coming in, but St. Brown with the extra few days of rest after playing on Thursday Night Football last week, I think he's going to play in this game. He's a gamer. Is Brown a tough guy as well? We've seen him not play 100% and still put up top line numbers. So right now, this week versus a weak secondary in the Carolina Panthers, where I think even, let's say it's 70-75%, St. Brown could have a big ball game. And I got him at 6. Number 7, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Ja'Marr Chase, he's pretty frustrated right now, and rightfully so, over the last few weeks not getting the ball. And after Week 4's ball game, he told reporters that get him the ball, he's open pretty much every play. So this week here, I think this is what Cincinnati's going to do. They're going to force feed Ja'Marr Chase like they did in Week 3's game, where he erupted for 12 catches, 141 yards. So last week, he had 7 catches, 73 yards. Obviously a lot of garbage time, but in this game, in a weak Arizona secondary with Budda Baker out at least a few more weeks while he's on IR, I think Ja'Marr Chase is going to be a focal point of the offense, and they're going to force feed him. And if they want to win this game, I think that's the game plan that Joe Burrow and this Bengal team need. We know Burrow's not 100%. He's playing pretty much on the leg right now with a bad calf. And Chase this week, I think, gets back to business and has a big game. Number 8, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave, he's been solid so far this season. I know Derek Carr, he hasn't been the greatest quarterbacks to start the year, but he's still getting the football to Olave. He's going out there, he's making all the plays, and quickly in a season, he became the number 1 wideout over there in New Orleans and one of the better wideouts in the league. So this week here in a banged-up secondary at New England with the rookie Gonzalez out for the season, even though I know they just traded for J.C. Jackson, which was a good move for this Patriots secondary. I still think Chris Olave has a good ball game and rolls in this one with a big performance. With number 9, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. So CeeDee Lamb, he's had a couple good games and a couple games where it's been quiet. But in this one, they're going to need him a lot if they want to win this game. I don't think the defense is going to dominate like we've seen in all 3 victories that the Cowboys have this season, where right here versus a tough San Francisco defense, he's going to have to go out there and make plays, and if they want to win the game and move the ball down the field. So CeeDee Lamb, a very talented wide receiver, but obviously the thing holding him back, I believe, is Dak Prescott's not a consistent quarterback, and a quarterback who's not accurate as well, that some passes where guys are wide open, he misses. And that's been the case with him and Lamb. But this week here, they're going to force feed him, I believe. If they want to win this game, putting up plays and points on the board offensively, it's going to go through Lamb in this one. Number 10, Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. So Cooper Kupp, he's back finally, it looks like, here for this Ram team. Going to practice and ready to go. So this Ram team adds another great element, obviously. Their best player back into the fold to go with a Puka Nacua, who I think his stats are going to take a hit. But Cooper Kupp, one of the best route runners, if not the best route runner in the league. Great possession wide receiver. And him and Matthew Stafford just have great ESP. So this week, if he's 100% and ready to go, he's a top 10 receiver, even versus a solid Philly secondary. Number 11, Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. So Brandon Ayuk's quickly emerging up the ranking boards over the last few weeks here. Him and Brock Purdy have a great rapport. Brandon Ayuk, he's been a better route runner over the last couple seasons now, after obviously coming into the league with different quarterbacks, Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance for a little bit. But him and Purdy have the best chemistry out of the other two quarterbacks I mentioned. So right now, pretty decent matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. We know this Cowboy defense is good, but obviously with Trevon Diggs out for the season, it's a big hit, and I think Brandon Ayuk's going to take advantage over there of whoever's going to guard him at the second quarter. If it's going to be Bland, Jordan Lewis if he returns in this game, but either way, I think Ayuk has a good ball game, and I got him at 11. Number 12, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Smith, we know he's a big play wide receiver, and there's going to games he scores 35 fantasy points, and then games he don't really do much and scores 7-8 fantasy points. But this week here, indoor game in Los Angeles, a potential shootout, fast track indoors here. I think Devonta Smith has a big game, and Jalen Hurts, he just has a perfect deep ball to get it to an A.J. Brown and a Devonta Smith. So this week here, with I think more coverage roll towards Brown way, Smith could get that one-on-one coverage and have a good game. Number 13, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. Samuel, we know he's not 100%, nursing a rib injury. Last week, he really didn't do anything at all. He was a decoy in that ball game versus the Arizona Cardinals. But this week here, big NFC matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. A team, obviously, Deebo Samuel's owned throughout his NFL career. So right now, this week, I think he has another good game, even though the veteran Stephon Gilmore most likely is going to be on him, and he's still one of the better coverage corners in the league. But anyway, Deebo's a versatile guy. Last week, like I said, they limited his touches to get him ready for this week, and I think he has a good one in this week. Actually, not touching the football a lot going into this one. Number 14, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. So Puka Nacua, what a season it's been so far for him, with 500 yards receiving on the year for Nacua, and last week a walk-off touchdown for his first career touchdown. So right now, I know Cooper Kupp's back in the mix. We'll see how these two guys are going to get going. But honestly, I think Nacua, he'll take a little bit of hit, his stats, but he's still going to be a wide receiver that's going to get open, and there's going to still be single coverage. When you got Kupp and Nacua, two great route runners on the field, and getting open in the system of Sean McVay's schemes, that's a dangerous combination, no doubt about it. So even with Kupp back, I think Nacua still could be a wide receiver weekly that could put up 15, 20 fantasy points PPR. And this week here versus Philly secondary that's been leaky on the season, I got Nacua at 14, 15, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Waddle, so far this season, we really haven't seen much out of him. Week 1, he had 11 points. Week 2, 12. Week 3, out with the concussion. And last week in the blowout loss, only 8.5 fantasy points. But this week here, a good matchup at the New York Giants. One of the worst secondaries in the league, and one of the youngest secondaries in the league, with a few rookies back there. So right now, this Dolphin team, they got to get Waddle back in the game plan a little bit more. You know, all the coverage is obviously going to roll towards Tyreek Hill's way. So if he's got one-on-one matchups, I would take Waddle, especially versus this young secondary. And hopefully the breakout game happens here, because Waddle's a great receiver. Last season, he had over 1,300 yards. And there's no reason why he's off to the slow start this year. Number 16, Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets. Garrett Wilson, we know he's one of the best up-and-coming young receivers in the league. But obviously, his quarterback, Zach Wilson's been holding him back so far this season. But last week, he had 14 targets, which was good to see. 9 catches, 60 yards for a solid game. And this week, he had the Denver Broncos, where their secondary's been getting torched week in and week out, even though they got one of the best corners, obviously, in the league, in Patrick Surtain. I think if Zach Wilson could just buy time and find Garrett Wilson, then he don't even have to throw perfect balls for Garrett Wilson to make plays. He's just that type of receiver that if it's in his area, he's going to go out there and get it. So this week here with a pretty decent matchup and a game you know the Jets want to take, and it's a must-win kind of at 1-3 on the season here. I got him at 16. Number 17, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So Nico Collins, one of the better receivers so far in fantasy football. And him and the rookie CJ Stroud, they've had a good rapport so far this season. And last week, Collins exploded over 30 fantasy points in PPR leagues. This week, a good matchup at the Falcons, where I think the Falcons in this one, they're going to be good against the run, but Nico Collins could give them a problem. And CJ Stroud, he's used to dropping back a whole bunch already this season. And so far, he hasn't even thrown an interception. So this week here, indoor ball game, fast track, obviously, could be a potential shootout between these two teams. And I think Nico Collins, he's rising up the rankings quickly. And I got him at 17, number 18, Calvin Ridley of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Ridley, so far this season, we really haven't seen much out of him. I know week 1 he had the monster game. Weeks 2 and 3 didn't do much. And last week, besides that touchdown, he only finished the game with 11.80 fantasy points. So this week, a tough matchup at the Bills, even though the game's in London, and that's pretty much Jacksonville's second home, versus secondary that I know is banged up, but they still have great coverage, guys, even with Tre'Davious White out for the season here. And Pointer banged up, but he could play in this one. So Calvin Ridley, he's still going to get targets. He's still a good playmaker. But this week, he's a number 2 wide receiver, in my opinion. So I got him at 18, 19, DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. So pretty much DJ Moore has been the only bright spot, and Cole Kmet for 1 week last week with this offense. So DJ Moore last week found the end zone once again, went over 100 yards in that game. And him and Justin Fields have a great rapport in tonight's game, Thursday Night Football. You know these games are usually high scoring. So with a good matchup in a mediocre to poor Washington Commanders secondary, I got Moore 19, number 20, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Michael Pittman, so far, he's been pretty solid the first 3 out of 4 games this year. Now with Anthony Richardson back in the lineup, we know he's got a cannon. He can really stretch the field. And this week, it's a good matchup versus the Tennessee Titans that obviously do not defend the pass well this season. So right now, the Titans definitely could do well against the run. But if you want to beat this Titan team, you got to beat them through the air. And we saw it early in the season. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen go off for some big games. Last week, I know we didn't see much because Joe Burrow couldn't move the football on this defense. But I think this week here, Pittman as a number 2 receiver flex option is pretty solid, and I got him at 20. One Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Christian Kirk, the last few weeks, he's been playing good football for this Jacksonville Jaguar team, and he's been Trevor Lawrence's number 1 target, with Calvin Ridley taking a little bit of a backseat. But this week with a tough matchup versus the Bills here in London, even though it's a home game for the Buffalo Bills, and possibly Zay Jones coming back, I think the numbers are going to go down a little bit here, Christian Kirk, but he's still a borderline number 2 flex option this week. And I got him at 21, 22, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. So Watson returned last week on a limited snap count, and he still found the end zone for 2 catches, 25 yards, and a touchdown. And this week here with 11 days off, pretty much another bye week for this Green Bay Packer team. They're on Monday Night Football at the Vegas Raiders, and that secondary really isn't that good. Jordan Love is playing good football this season. And Christian Watson, we know it just takes one play for him to have a big fantasy day. So this week, with a good matchup, getting rest, 11 days off, hamstring injury after coming back in week 4. So I got him in 22, 23, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So Terry McLaurin, we know, is a big play wide receiver. He's been the number 1 wideout for a few seasons now with this Commander team. And he's a guy that goes out there and he can make all the plays. He can run all the routes. He could break tackles. He could break away. And this week, a good matchup versus the Bears that obviously have one of the worst secondaries in all pro football. So right now, McLaurin, he's been a solid number 2 flex option all season. A guy that'll get you 6-7 catches per game usually, 60, 70 yards at worst. And right now, with a good matchup Thursday Night Football, usually high-scoring games, I got him at 23, 24, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know T. Higgins, he didn't practice on Wednesday, and there's a real possibility he could miss this ball game with the rib injury. But if he does play, it's a good matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. That secondary's banged up. Budda Baker, their best defender, on IR. So right now, Higgins, I know it's been a struggle for this whole offense this season, with Joe Burrow not 100% with the calf. Jamar Chase frustrated, he's not getting the football. And T. Higgins being banged up. And another guy not making consistent plays week in and week out. But this week with a good matchup, and even if he's operating, if he plays 60, 70%, he's a wide receiver that cracks the top 24, 24, 25 Hollywood Brown of the Arizona Cardinals. He's been under the radar this season, is Hollywood Brown. And he's found the end zone 2 times this season. We know he's got big playability. We saw it last season with Kyler Murray early in the year before Brown went out with injury. And now this year with Joshua Dobbs, they got a good rapport. He's making plays, and most of the ball games they've been playing catch up is Arizona, where they have no choice but to throw. So Brown, I know some of these games, garbage time, he's been collecting points, but fantasy points are fantasy points. And this week in a pretty decent matchup versus a mediocre to poor secondary of the Cincinnati Bengals coming to town, I think Hollywood could have another good game, and I got him in 25-26. Adam Thielen of the Carolina Panthers. So Thielen's resurrected his career so far this year, being the number one target and wide receiver over there in Carolina, even though there's talks that the Panthers want to go out there and make a deal for another wideout because they think they're thin with Thielen, DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall, and Mingo being their top guys. But anyway, Thielen, the last couple weeks, he's had 15 or more fantasy points. And this week here at an old division foe when he was with Minnesota, the Detroit Lions, he knows the ins and outs of that team. He knows the stadium very well, versing them once a year, every year at Detroit. And this week in the indoor game, it's going to be a game where I believe this Panther team will be trailing early and often. And Bryce Young's going to have to drop back and throw the football 35-40 times. So I got Thielen at 26-27. Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. So Doubs, he's been pretty solid so far this year. Week 1, he had 2 touchdowns. Then week 2, didn't do much. And the last 2 weeks, he's been putting up sound fantasy numbers. Last week, 9 catches, 95 yards. So right now, he's emerging as a 1A, 1B wide receiver for this Green Bay Packer team. Like I said, Christian Watson's back last week. He found the end zone. But Romeo Doubs, he's making the plays. He could go get that jump ball. And he's a solid wide receiver that knows how to get open. So this week versus a weak Raiders secondary, and I know some of the work's going to be lost to Christian Watson being back and even Aaron Jones being even healthier. After last week, he was on a snap count as well. I think Doubs still is a number 3 receiver, a flex option, is solid, and I got him 27-28. Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So Zay Flowers, he started off the first 2 games of the season getting it going and putting up big points, but the last couple weeks, the points really haven't been there. He's definitely good for a deep ball per game, but he hasn't found the end zone really as Flowers. Well, Lamar Jackson obviously within the red zone, running in the end zone a lot, and Mark Andrews getting those touchdowns last week, 2 of them in the red zone. But Zay Flowers, like I said, he looks good so far in his rookie season. I know Bateman and Beckham returned to practice, but those guys really haven't been a factor even when they played the first few weeks of the season. So this week here, in a pretty tough matchup with a good Steelers defense, even though I think the Ravens are going to take care of business and win this game. I got Zay Flowers 28-29 staying in the same game. George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So right now, it's either going to be Pickett or Mitchell Trubisky. And Pickett right now, he's practicing in a heavy knee brace. So we'll see if he gives it a go. But anyway, this Baltimore defense the last couple weeks of playing good football. George Pickens, obviously, he's been a solid wide receiver, now the number 1 guy there over the last few weeks with Deontay Johnson, who's been out on the injured reserve list. So right now, we know he's a big play receiver, but there's some games he'll have monster games and games he don't do much. So right now, this week, versus a tough Baltimore defense, and if Pickett plays, he's not 100%. I got him at 29-30. Tank Dell of the Houston Texans. So Tank Dell, so far this season in his rookie year, he's been pretty solid. I know last week was a quiet week, but I think he gets back on track this week, and it's a good matchup with the Atlanta Falcons, where the Falcons are good against the run. And this Texan team, to be honest, I think they want to throw the football a whole lot. They like what CJ Stroud's doing so far this season. First 4 games into his NFL career, no interceptions. And both rookies, Dell and CJ Stroud, have great rapport and been on the same page. So Tank Dell's got game breaker speed. He's got playmaking ability, and this week I think it's a bounce back for him, and I got him at 30. Number 31, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings, so another rookie wide receiver who showed some flashes the first few weeks of the season, and a solid deep ball threat over there in Minnesota, but obviously a lot of mouths to feed with Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson in the lineup, and even Alexander Madison out of the backfield getting a decent workload. So right now, Addison, we know he's got game breaker speed. We know he could beat secondaries, and this week here versus Kansas City in a ball game where we know the Vikings are going to have to put up 25, 30-point range at least to compete and try to pull off the upset. I think Addison could exploit this secondary, which isn't all that great over there for this Chief team. And a home game here for Minnesota, which is always a plus, where they put up big numbers over the last few seasons indoors at home. Number 32, Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So Gabe Davis, he's pretty much been a touchdown dependable wide receiver this season, and so far it's paid off with 3 touchdowns this year. So Gabe Davis, he's not going to get a lot of yards, it seems like. He's only going to get 3-4 catches per game, but he's been fine in the end zone, and like I said, he's been a boom or bust wideout And this week, a decent matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, where I think Josh Allen and this offense are going to continue their dominance and putting up a lot of points. So the last few weeks for this Buffalo Bill offense, 37 points and then 48 points. So their offense is playing on another level right now. Gabe Davis, he's getting some production out of it. And this week here, I think he has a decent game at 32, 33. Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Courtland Sutton seems like the number one target right now for Russell Wilson and this Denver Bronco team. I know this week's a tough matchup versus a solid defense in the New York Jets. And we don't know if Sauce Gardner is going to cover Sutton or Jerry Jeudy or just play one side of the field. But anyway, Courtland Sutton and Wilson have a good rapport. It's paying off for Sutton in the Sean Payton offense over here. And last week, Sutton once again had a decent ball game to help this Bronco team come from behind and beat the Bears. So this week here, I have him at 33, 34, Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Jakobi Meyers, we've seen some flashes from him this season so far. I know last week he didn't do much with only 2 catches, 33 yards. But this week here, pretty decent matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. I think Jimmy Garoppolo will return in this game after last week he missed it with a concussion. And Myers, he's a solid possession wide receiver. And in a way, he reminds me of Brandon Ayuk, the way Jimmy Garoppolo was using Ayuk the last few seasons over there in San Francisco. So if Jimmy Garoppolo plays, it's a bump up here for Myers. And if Aiden O'Donnell plays, he's still a starting wide receiver. And obviously with 4 teams on bye this week, Myers made the list. So I got him at 34, 35, DeAndre Hopkins of the Tennessee Titans. So coming into the season, I knew it wasn't a great landing spot here for Hopkins. Bad offensive line over there in Tennessee. Ryan Tannehill, not a consistent and accurate quarterback who holds on to it a lot. And right now, Hopkins is not putting up numbers. Last season, after he came off a suspension with the Cardinals, he had a great second half of the year. But right now, he hasn't done anything with Tennessee. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if he does have a pop game at Indianapolis, though, where he's owned them throughout his career, especially going back to his Houston Texan days. But so far here with the Tennessee Titans, he hasn't done anything in his scheme and system that's failed him as well. Not just Hopkins not making plays and getting open. And the 36th and final wideout I'm ranking this week here is Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. And Michael Thomas quietly has been pretty decent so far this season with 9 or more fantasy points each week here in PPR leagues to start the season. So this week, a matchup at the New England Patriots. Their defense is banged up, obviously. Judon out for a while. Gonzalez, the impressive rookie corner, out for the season. I know they just traded for J.C. Jackson from the Chargers, which was a good deal. But right here, Michael Thomas, like I said, is a flex option or third receiver. I think is doable this week with a lot of teams on bye. And has had 9 or more fantasy points. But I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop where he gets injured around this time. But hopefully he don't. But it's just going off track records. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking here for week 5 of the fantasy football season.